everybody, my name's Keith Haviland. I'm a film producer and I've made some films about space and spaceflight. And so today I'm going to give you a little talk on those films. But also I hope I'm going to make you really excited about space as I am. And as part of that, I'm going to show you some things that have been in space today, in today's session. And for that reason, I'm wearing some unfashionable blue gloves so I can handle these things carefully. And so the first film I got involved with was a film about an astronaut called Gene Cernan. He was a friend. And Gene was the commander of Apollo 17. And that was the last mission in 1972 to land on the moon. And so Gene, in some ways, was the last man on the moon. And that's the title of the movie. And let me show you a DVD cover. And hopefully you can see that picture of Gene at the front. And that's something which is very special to me as a movie and an image. But maybe even more special is this. So here we have an overglove. And this was the overglove that Gene wore on the moon. It was over his main glove. It protected it because they worked really hard. And so if you look at the overglove, you can see it's really beaten up. It's really dirty, and that dirt is moon dust. And so that's an extraordinary thing in terms of its history. And it was talking about this glove that introduced me to the film and to filmmaking in general 5 or 6 years ago. And so Last Man on the Moon is about Gene's personal story. And it follows him through his Navy career. It follows him through Gemini 9. And the Gemini missions were test missions to learn basic things, and often quite dangerous. And so one of the things that Gene did on Gemini 9 was a spacewalk that went absolutely horribly wrong. And he was lucky to escape with his life, and they had to basically cancel it. He then flew in the lunar module, the part that's meant to land, on Apollo 10. Now, Apollo 10 was the final rehearsal before the real moon landing on Apollo 11. So Gene couldn't land, but he and Tom Stafford got to within a few miles of the surface in the lunar module, and then came back to Earth. And a few months later, Neil Armstrong, Mike Collins, Buzz Aldrin blasted off in Apollo 11 towards the moon. So it's a very important rehearsal mission. Gene got his chance to walk on the moon with Apollo 17. So it's the last of the Apollo missions at the end of 1972. It was one of the best and most scientific. They had a lunar rover. They did 3 days of exploration. And that's something which finished the program off extremely well. And more than 50 years ago since we started Apollo, just under 50 years ago since Gene was the last man on the moon to date. And hopefully all of you will see the next men and women to walk on the moon really quite soon. So that's the main part of the film. But the film also covers Gene as a person. And it looks at his family life, it looks at his friendships. And there's one particular great friendship with another pilot at the heart of the film. And especially for me, one of the best parts of Last Man is the description of his relationship with Tracy, his daughter, who was 9 years old at the time of Apollo 17. And that's a great and friendly part of the film. So Last Man was a really special experience. I got to know Gene well. I got to know people around him well. I got to take the film with the director and the other producers to a festival in Texas. Great experience. After that, we made a movie about mission control. So Mission Control is moving on from Gene as an individual and as a hero and as a single person at the forefront of space exploration. It's moving on to the team behind the scenes. And one of the key things about space is the fact that it was 400,000 people at peak that put a man on the moon. NASA was employing tens of thousands of people itself, and more tens of thousands in the contractors and companies that served the program. It was a huge undertaking for the US, something real historic. And I think the fact they did this quite quickly shows the power of teamwork. And Mission Control was our attempt, I think a really good attempt, a really successful film to tell that story. And so we look at the people like the flight directors like Gene Kranz and Jerry Griffin and Glyn Lunny, the people who ran the missions. We looked at the people who looked after navigation and the planning of where the spacecraft should be and how they landed. We looked at the people who looked after the spacecraft themselves. The command module, which was the part where the astronauts came back to Earth, shaped like a cone, and the lunar module, which was a buggy-like thing that was designed only to land on the moon and blast off again. And so we looked at that team, and the key thing about that team is many of them came from really ordinary backgrounds. Some of them had degrees, some of them didn't have degrees. They worked together, they became one of the best teams I've ever come across, and they achieved across an 8 or 9 year period in the Apollo space race era some really quite extraordinary things. So the power of that team is remarkable, and that's what we captured in our film Mission Control. Now I've got one more artifact to show you that's related to that film, because a key moment in the film is the story of Apollo 13. And Apollo 13 was the mission where the side of the spacecraft blew up and ripped away panels and ripped away fuel tanks and put the astronauts very much in danger of losing their lives. And so what Mission Control helped them plan was to use the lunar module, this buggy thing that was meant only to land on the moon, as a lifeboat. And that would carry them round the moon, and they'd use the lunar module's engine to blast back to Earth and re-enter in the command module. So that was the premise of the rescue plan, and it worked. In many ways, it was NASA's finest hour, and the film Apollo 13, starring Tom Hanks, is one of the best and most accurate descriptions of the Apollo era from a dramatic sense. I do have one artifact to show you, and it's this rather wonderful checklist. And so in booting up the lunar module to turn it into a lifeboat, they had to move very quickly. And one of the things they had to do was translate the navigation coordinates of the command module into numbers that the lunar module would understand. And that was a calculation they had to do very quickly. And if you watch the film Apollo 13, it's a big scene in the movie where Tom Hanks does the calculation and checks it with the people in Mission Control back on Earth. And this, I'm delighted to tell you, is the actual checklist from the mission, not the film. This is the real thing. And there's a little note that Jim Lovell wrote describing exactly what happened with this particular checklist. So that's a piece of history as well. So Mission Control was about Apollo mainly, but we also brought it up to date by looking at modern Mission Control. And the key thing that we did there was to make sure we show how things have changed in society and the US and NASA. And we interviewed two very good female flight directors who now run missions and look after the International Space Station and other parts of NASA's current plans, to make sure that we get a really balanced view of how NASA has evolved to give everybody of any creed or background, men and women, an opportunity. So that was another important part of the film. So Blast Man and Mission Control were very important steps in telling the NASA story. And then last year, as a documentary, we got to tell the story of Neil Armstrong. And we have a documentary called Armstrong that came out in the middle of 2019 around the celebration of the moon landing, which was 50 years ago last year in 1969. And so there we worked with the family, we interviewed other people from Mission Control, other astronauts to tell the story of Neil. And Neil was a remarkable man, quiet, didn't like celebrity, but he was very clever. He was somebody who was one of the world's best pilots, maybe one of the best pilots of all time. He was very, very calm in a crisis. And so several times in his life in the Navy, on a mission called Gemini 8, and during the Apollo 11 landing itself, he was really calm about solving problems, understanding his craft, his aircraft, or the spacecraft, and dealing with the challenges that came up. And some of those skills he learned as an X-15 test pilot. An X-15 was a rocket plane designed to go to the edge of space, and that was a key part of NASA's development program in the 1960s. He then flew in Gemini 8, I mentioned a few moments ago. That's a very difficult mission because the spacecraft got into a horrible spin, but Neil managed to work out the problem and get out of it and then land successfully, saving the life of him and another astronaut called Dave Scott, who's also in the movie. We follow him then on Apollo 11, where he became that legendary figure. He became the first man to step onto the lunar surface. And that's something he loved doing. He loved the challenge. He didn't like the celebrity that came with it, but he was really fulfilling NASA's mission. And I've got one artifact to show you from that, which is this. And this is a Robbins medallion. It's silver. It's got an eagle on the front. It's got the names of the astronauts and key facts about the mission on the back. It's a very small thing. And NASA carry those in bags on the spacecraft as kind of souvenirs, and the astronauts will give them out to people who help them later on. And so that's available from relatives and friends of the astronauts. And I'm lucky to say that along the way I managed to get one that was carried to the moon of Apollo 11. So another proud thing that I could show and really represents that mission, and the fact it was collective. They were using these to thank the people who helped them. One other thing that I've worked on that I will close with is a film called Chasing the Moon. It's a documentary series. That also came out last year. It's quite long, but it really gives a sense of the 1960s and how wonderful a period it was. And it looks at society, it looks at the impact on the US from children to the older generation. And it's a wonderful historical document. And it's something that, again, I'm proud to be involved with. The director, Robert Stone, is the man who absolutely takes the credit for what is a wonderful piece of work and had just been nominated for an Emmy. So that's a big deal in filmmaking. So that's what I've got to say. I hope I passed across some of the excitement I feel about the subject. I hope I've inspired you to find out a little bit more about the Moon programme. And with that, I'm slightly over time, so I will close. Thanks, everybody. Great to talk to you.